everyone, welcome back to my channel. You may know me as the Fluffy Curvy Princess or Sarah, and today I wanted to talk about the rules I had to follow while I was in my cult school for a year. So today's video is taking a bit of a different route. I usually focus on books, and I do consider this for the most part a booktube channel, but I want to also use this channel to take time to talk about cults as well as how I grew up in a cult. For 1 year, I attended a non-accredited private Christian school. Even though I only attended the church school for a year, it was probably one of the most traumatizing experiences I ever went through. And my parents didn't want to put me through that again, so it was a very one and done situation. Though we did continue to attend the church for a while, even after we stopped going to the school. I have a lot of different horror stories that I could share with you one day, but for now, I just want to go over the student handbook and the ridiculous rules that we had to follow. I am not going to name the school or the church, because I want to protect the privacy of the teachers, the students, and yes, even the pastor/principal. I think that protecting those rights of privacy are important in this situation, though I will say the school is so small and private that I doubt even with the name and picture of the handbook you would be able to find anything about it online. There are things about the handbook that are pretty normal, I will say that, and we do start off with things that I think in most schools, Christian or not, would be understandable. And as a Christian school, the idea that it starts out with a statement of faith is important, and I think that's to be expected from a Christian school. But things quickly go downhill on page 4, where we start off strong by condemning government accreditation. Also, I want to clarify, though I will try to keep the quotes exact as possible, again for privacy, I'll be saying this school, this academy, this church, this location in place. And remember that the name of the actual school or location would have been there. This school has not and will not seek accreditation by any governmental agency. In so doing, we could be required to use textbooks developed by secular writers who promote concepts and values contrary to the Bible. To this point, the lack of accreditation has not hindered graduates who wish to enroll in secular colleges or universities. I want to pause this to point out that actually that year my friend, when she did graduate from school, after this had been written obviously, my friend could not attend university without a GED because the school was unaccredited. I was homeschooled, and my diploma was signed by an evaluator and was considered legitimate by the government. My homeschool diploma was considered more legitimate than this Christian school's. There were things in the handbook saying that if you wanted to be accredited and go through the school curriculum through Florida, because the curriculum that the school used was based in Florida, and they had an online school where you could go through that program, send everything down to Florida and be accredited. You could do that. But the school itself in Pennsylvania was not going to be accredited. It's interesting because if you've watched my other videos, people like Jack House were also very, very against accreditation. Next, let's move on to who was allowed to attend the school. This school is a closed school and is limited to active members of the church in the location. Regular church attendance is required by students. The school board will have the final say on each registration on an individual basis. The pastor and trustees of this church make up the school board of this academy. In the requirements to be in attendance, besides being an active member of the church, and even if you're an active member of another Baptist church, you weren't technically qualified. There was this desire, I feel like, within our church to keep the children closed into their own kind and their own group. We're not going to have people who are not Christians around my children. I'm not going to have even people who are Christians but don't believe the same, like Methodists or Catholics. We're not even going to have other Baptists who are going to a different church and might have slightly different beliefs attend the same school. And then in the list of requirements to attend, it says all students 4th through 12th grade must have a clear salvation testimony and follow the Lord in baptism by immersion in a church of like faith. Obviously, as a Christian, I have no trouble with children converting to Christianity, but I do see an issue here. You are requiring children, basically from the age of 10 and older, to have a confession of belief. And let's say a child who wants to attend school or their parent wants them to attend the school creates or fabricates a story. That way their child can continue to attend. It's just pressuring a child to make a profession that they might not genuinely believe in, which I think is a big issue in the IFBC. It also says students must regularly attend the church. There are pretty clear and normal policies through certain parts of this book, such as the attendance policy, where it says, that a certain amount of absences will require people being given demerits, or perhaps not even being allowed to graduate. These are things that are normal, I feel like, in most schools. After attendance, it talks about different awards. These awards are pretty typical, again, for getting good grades or having perfect attendance. My favorite, though, here is the Pastor's Award. Pastor's Award is awarded to a high school student who is actively involved in their church, has kept a great Christian testimony at school the entire year, and is viewed by the pastor as a spiritual leader in the school. Now, I don't have a problem with an award like this, but the reason I find it so funny is because my best friend, who that year, when she graduated, won the pastor's award, perhaps even less than a week later, had left the church because she wanted to be with her boyfriend who was Catholic. At the time in our church, it was considered a huge scandal. And is it bad that I find it a little funny? To be fair, she also thinks it's funny, and she has pictures of her in a dress at the graduation, and like a week later wearing pants while on a date with her Catholic boyfriend. Things that which would have not have been allowed had she had stayed in the church. We often use this as a joke to show how bad of a judge of character we thought the people in our church were, only looking at the outward appearance and not in the heart. The next thing of note that I wanted to point out was on page 11, which had to do with the way they were to punish or correct students if they disobeyed. Examples of typical corrective measures are student-teacher conference, demerits, sitting down for recess, writing sentences, student administrative conferences, fines, and parent administrator conference. Now, I don't have a problem really with any of these punishments, but from what I remember, these were not the typical punishments that the children in the school received. I remember my brother and his class being frequently told they had to run laps around the church. I at one time witnessed a little boy being forced to do push-ups and exercises till he was brought to tears. And the pastor said that he had done that on purpose because he wanted to make sure that the boy was sorry for what he had done. There was also a lot of public humiliation involved. Though these recommended punishments are in the handbook, I personally very rarely remember seeing this kind of punishment being dealt out. The only positive I can say is that our Christian school did not practice spanking children when I attended, though I heard it had practiced it a year or two prior. Students who attend the school represent the church, and more importantly, our Savior Jesus Christ. Our students are expected to obey school rules at all times, not just in school. Students are also required to be in school dress code when on school property during school hours, even if not attending school at the time. So this basically meant, any rule that was in this handbook you were expected to be obeying outside of school. For example, it says that you're not allowed to watch R-rated movies or you'll get a demerit. That was not just a school rule. If they found out in your own home you had watched an R-rated movie, you could get in trouble for that. And to make things even worse, you were expected to report on other students. It says students who do not report violations of the standards of conduct may be subject to disciplinary action. But it was more than this because there was, besides having to obey these rules all the time, the pastor had put in this little leeway where if he just didn't like you basically or thought you were a bad influence, even if there was nothing you had done technically wrong, he could just kick you out. Because it says on page 12, full cooperation is expected from both students and parents in the education of the student. If at any time the school feels that this cooperation is lacking, the students may be requested to transfer out. Also, if the student's behavior or attitude indicates an uncooperative spirit or one that is out of harmony with the spirit and standards of this school, whether or not there is any definite breach of conduct, he or she may be requested to transfer out. I had heard rumors that a boy, a few weeks before his graduation, was told he had to quit his job because he was working in between Sunday services at his job. Obviously, he didn't really have a choice. There was only a few weeks before graduation, so he quit his job. But can you imagine the humiliation that must have been? Again, with these kinds of clauses, he could do that. Now that you know the kind of attitude that's expected and that these rules are to be followed at all times, why don't I read you these rules, some of which are reasonable and could be found in any school, and others which you might find a bit unusual. The appropriate discipline will be administered for class disruptions, failure to complete homework, running in the building, littering, working on unrelated material, being unprepared for class, griping, sarcasm, horseplay, dress code violations, being alone with the opposite gender, which is underlined in this, skipping class or leaving campus without permission, use or possession of tobacco, listening to or possessing rock music, attending or viewing R-rated movies, entering school property through any other way than an unlocked door, dancing, gambling, reckless driving, disobedience, willfully assisting another student to commit wrong, forgery, worldly conversation. And for your information, worldly conversation could just be anything the pastor overheard that he thought was inappropriate. Worldly conversation, or touching a member of the opposite gender, except in an obvious emergency situation. I also remember that there were to be no cell phones. They had to be placed on the desk, I believe face down, and not be touched until the school day was done. And worldly conversation could mean a lot of things. For example, there is a time when at the school, and even at the church as a whole, we were not supposed to talk about movies with our friends. So this was brought up because a girl in Sunday school had mentioned Pitch Perfect, and the Sunday school assistant teacher had found that mentioning that movie was highly inappropriate, so she complained to the pastor, and the pastor said that therefore nobody was allowed to talk about movies anymore in Sunday school or at the church school. So we didn't. And if you were to be caught having that talk, it would probably be considered a worldly conversation, Worldly conversation is very broad, especially if you don't grow up in the kind of cult I grew up in, but it could range from a lot of things that probably would be considered normal, appropriate teenage topics, like rock music. There were a lot of unspoken rules, though. One of the unspoken rules that was not listed in here was that we were not allowed to lie down on the ground, especially if you're a girl, because that was considered inappropriate. The suspension list is a lot more normal than the demerit list, mentioning things like lying, stealing, disrespect, cursing, cheating, vandalism, gang-related items or symbols, or other misconduct. Although this list of infractions is not exhaustive, it represents behavior that is not acceptable. Again, most of these kinds of things I think are pretty typical for school, even non-Christian, to look at as a problem or to suspend someone over. But it goes a little further. Students may be expelled for any action or statement associated with violent behavior, including a joke, which could be interpreted as a threat. Student lockers, book bags, or other storage areas are subject to search without warning at the administrator's discretion. The school board will make decisions on an individual basis regarding expulsions and transfers. Again, leaving that big leeway where basically if they don't like you because they found out you're doing something that isn't even in the rules but they just don't like, you could be kicked out. And while the suspension is more normal, more whack than almost anything I found was the automatic expulsion list. Students will be expelled for the following offenses. So again, remember, you do this, automatically kicked out. Striking or attempting to strike a staff member. Probably one of the only normal things on this list. Possession or distribution of narcotics or alcoholic beverages, attending or viewing X-rated movies, possession of pornography, fornication, which in regular people speak would be sex before marriage, homosexual acts. The administration reserves the right to make necessary changes during the school year. Now again, I'm a Christian and I understand those rules existing at a Christian school, but to expel somebody because they had premarital sex in high school or because they looked at pornography online, I just feel like it's excessive and it's unrealistic to say you're going to expel somebody because of that. Dress code. Now, if you thought the rules were fun, I'm sure you're real excited to be hearing about the dress code, which I have dressed appropriately for today. So, let's start off with the boys. No coloring or bleaching of the hair will be permitted. Necklaces, chains, earrings, bracelets, and other feminine jewelry are not allowed. No tattoos or piercings are allowed on any body part. Boys and girls are both to wear collared shirts every day, and I remember this. If you had a collared shirt, it could not be more than 3 fingers under the collarbone, and it had to be buttoned all the way up until the top button, which could be unbuttoned. Shirts must be tucked in at all times. This was if you were a boy. And a white shirt must be worn under their shirt every day. No hoodies are allowed to be worn during class. Everyone hated that rule because during the winter it'd be wicked cool and we weren't allowed to wear a hoodie at all, and it was hard to find a sweatshirt without one. More instructions for the boys said pants must be worn with a brown or black belt. If you were 7th grade or under, you could wear jeans to school on a regular day, but if you were older than that, you were in 8th grade, you had to wear khaki pants or dress pants every day. And another thing was boys were not allowed to wear jeans to church. So that's another thing. Again, these rules applied to you if you weren't in school. So if you went to a Sunday church service, you were not allowed to wear jeans. It says in the handbook, in all caps, bold, boys would be expected to not wear jeans to church services. The dress code is being lowered for school days, but not for church days. Some more stuff was shorts are only to be worn on special occasions such as field trips, and parents will be notified when shorts can be worn. Shorts may not be worn on Casual Friday. Wind pants, sweatpants, jogging pants may not be worn on Casual Fridays. So again, pretty strict rules on what the boys were to wear at all times. Thankfully, they were being real lenient at one point and said pants with pockets on the legs may be worn. Glad to know. But that was if you're a boy. If you were a girl, I bet you can already imagine the kind of strictness we had to follow. Again, really vague rules because it says any reflection of modern fads or the contemporary music culture will not be accepted. No extravagant hair coloring, such as purple, orange, multiple colors, etc., or hairstyles will be permitted. So no, if you wanted to dye your hair green, bad, very bad. The administration reserves the right to determine what is not acceptable hairstyling or attire. Again, very loose, very nondescript. You can just determine whatever you want based on your mood. Now, as you will see, I'm wearing a dress code appropriate outfit today. Now again, girls also had to wear the collared shirts. So I would wear a lot of shirts like this that, had a really high collar, or I would wear button collared shirts. But they did have to be collared. I also remember on the first day of school, he told us that teachers did not have to follow this rule. They could wear whatever shirts they wanted to. He said to the whole group, if we had a problem with that, it just showed how immature we really were. Again, no hoodies for girls either. No see-through blouses may be worn. No crop tops. Blouses must be long enough to stay modest even when the arms are raised. No blouses with worldly phrases or material on them will be allowed at any activity. Proper undergarments are required for all occasions. How? Why? Okay, I always forget that's in there, and then when I go back and read it, I'm like, why are you looking into our undergarments? How would you know what kind of undergarments I'm wearing? Are you going to check? How would you know? Are you going to really give me a demerit because you somehow found out and thought my underwear was inappropriate? What even are proper undergarments, and how are you going to enforce whether a teenage girl is wearing them or not? And then, again, all girls are required to wear an undershirt under their school shirt. But that just covers the top half of the outfit. Now, if you were wearing a dress, it did not have to be collared, but it still had to follow, I'm pretty sure, the 3-finger rule. The hems of skirts and dresses must touch the floor when the student is in an upright kneeling position, or basically to the bottom of the knee when standing. The knee must be covered when in a sitting position. If the skirt has a slit, the top of the slit must come no higher than the crease of the knee when the student is in an upright kneeling position. No tight-fitting skirts are allowed. A slip must be worn every day except when wearing a jean skirt. And we did have dress code checks. There were times when a girl would take all the girls and the pastor would take all the boys into a separate room, and they would dress code them and make sure that we were all dressed appropriately. And I remember some of my friends getting in trouble because they had forgotten to wear slips or undershirts. As you can see today, I am appropriately, I have a collared shirt. I raise my arms, it does lift a little, so I gotta watch that or else I'll get dress coded. And I went the extra mile, wore an extra long skirt. Make sure it covers my knees. I will say I am breaking one rule though. I forgot to put a slip on. So I'm going to bring all the boys to the yard with that knowledge. The idea of a girl wearing pants to church or school was ludicrous. That was not even something up for debate. But it wasn't just the clothing. Makeup may be worn in moderation. Fingernail polish must be conservative, and black is not allowed. Excessive and/or distracting jewelry is not allowed, including ankle bracelets and toe rings. Those demonic toe rings. Only one earring may be worn in each ear, and that earring must be on the earlobe only. Students may not have piercings on any other parts of the body. Tattoos are not allowed. No pants or shorts are allowed whenever the student visits the church property, whether school is in session or not. Girls are expected to follow the dress code for Casual Friday at all church teen activities. Special instructions will be given for any water activities. Girls are expected to follow the Monday through Friday dress code for all church services. So yeah, that's basically how I dressed, and it actually influenced, because I got used to dressing that way every day. I dressed like a secretary librarian pretty much every day for the next couple of years, even when I wasn't in school. Because I don't know, I'm a loser. Even now I have collared shirts and skirts just because I like to look a little bookish, but I'll have to show you pictures sometime. I have some on my TikTok. It was a scary time for me. I did not know how to dress. The school dress code is not just for students though. We also respectfully ask that the parents maintain the school's dress standards on school property and at school functions. Any parent wishing to attend a school field trip would be required to abide by the school dress code on that activity. So if you're a parent and you want to come to church, what you should be doing if you want your child to go to school, you have to wear a skirt, and it has to be down to your knees, and you have to wear a really high top that's only 3 fingers or less from your neck. Anyway, after that craziness, it talks about some things when it comes to picking up your children from school safely, as well as the finances. Thankfully, this school charged as little as possible. The parents, I remember, did not pay very much for the school, thank goodness. It was mostly just the curriculum, though I do think there was a little bit for registration and perhaps tuition, but it was very, very low. I do remember this as well. There were fundraisers because of this. We have 2 fundraisers per year, one in the fall and one in the spring. It will be mandatory for each student to participate in both fundraisers. I do remember that. And I remember going door to door in my neighborhood selling these little discount cards. Once you bought them, people could take them to different stores in the area to get discounts. Which wasn't too wild, though I guess it was a little embarrassing to look back on. The next section actually was also pretty normal, talking about why they have homework and that parents need to make sure their children do it. I would agree with that. And discipline when you're young is pretty important. But you know what? We can't have too much of a good thing, because then we get weird again, where it talks about parent-teacher cooperation. And I feel like the best way to explain this is to just read the whole paragraph to you. I think this really explains this pastor's mindset about children. And I feel like a lot of times growing up, he accused children of lying or trying to manipulate him. And I think his reasoning as to why he thought children were like this can be reflected in this paragraph. Many times, a child looks at school as a contest to see who will run the classroom. The challenge is for the student to try the teacher to see just how far he/she can go. Due to our sin nature, these types of actions are natural and can be expected out of students. What is not natural is for the child's parent to take the same attitude toward the teacher. Those who exercise authority toward children should be in harmony with each other. Your child's teacher may not do everything exactly the way you would, but you should never let the child know that there's any question in your backing of the teacher. To divide authority will teach the child to have no respect for authority. There must be a constant reassurance that the parent and teacher are working together if the child is to grow up with love and respect for authority and discipline. Basically, the teacher tells the kid they're wrong, The parent needs to side with the teacher. And this mindset is very common in the IFB. The whole idea that if a teacher does something or a pastor does something because they're in charge of the child, you as a parent, your job is to back those people up. And while I do think there are times for that, your job as a parent is to protect your child, not just to side against them. And this is the kind of mindset that allows for abuse to happen, because not that I'm saying that this did happen at my school, but when abuse does happen, children feel like they can't go to their parents because they're taught from a young age that their parents must always side with the teacher or principal. It just allows for an environment of abuse to thrive. And I do remember a lot of times when my parents did challenge the pastor on things they thought were wrong, and he was not pleased with my parents for that. But I'm really thankful they did, because that's my parents' job, to make sure that I'm in a safe environment. Sometimes that means siding with the teacher, and sometimes that means going against the teacher. After that really crazy sentence, there's a few other normal things about how there'll be parent-teacher conferences. Make sure to dress your child appropriately for the playground, as in wear winter gear in winter, summer gear in summer, and then report cards, which are all pretty normal until we get to the section on field trips. Girls are to wear dresses that conform to the dress code regulations. Culottes may be worn only when permission is given in advance and must conform to the dress code regulations. So if you don't know, culottes are these freaking ugly, they're basically a pair of pants that's super baggy, but then that part in the middle where the pants be separated is sewn together. They're the ugliest thing in the world. I hated them. I wore them all the time because it was sometimes easier than wearing a skirt, but they were the worst. They are so humiliating to wear. And if I ever see another pair of culottes again, I will personally burn them. Anyway, back to the subject. Culottes may be worn only when permission is given in advance and must conform to the dress code regulations. Boys may wear a casual Friday attire. Students may not bring portable radios, tape players, or CD players without prior approval. While traveling, boys and girls may not sit together. Heaven forbid a boy and a girl sit next to each other. You know, if we allow that to happen, someone's just going to pop out a baby right there on the bus. What did they think was going to happen? Do they think someone was going to give birth on the bus right there if they let them sit next to each other for a half hour? I do remember you also were not allowed to play on your phones. Craziness continues into the section Student Conduct. Student conduct should be in obedience to God's word. Courtesy, kindness, respect, and orderliness in all aspects of behavior are stressed. Students should exercise these qualities at all times toward peers, the faculty and administration, and visitors to our school. As a sign of courtesy and respect, students should answer yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, and no ma'am when addressed by an adult. Prompt and cheerful obedience is expected when a child is corrected for misconduct. While I do understand that these are things that we should be striving for children to learn, to make these requirements that you need to be prompt and cheerful when you're being punished, again, I don't know why this rubs me the wrong way. It probably even shouldn't, but it does. It's just, I felt like in the IFB there's very much this I'm going to stomp on your face and you're going to be happy about it attitude, and I just feel like this kind of feeds into that. There's some instructions for student drivers that aren't too crazy as well, and then other things about when children will be allowed to use telephones in emergencies, as well as how to keep up with school days when they're closed for the weather. On the last page though, and this was a very big deal because we had a boy and a girl in our church who were kind of close at the time, and though they weren't dating, they kind of were dating, just not officially. And on the last page of the yearbook it said, believing that students will be distracted from their studies and that it will not only be detrimental to their education, but also can easily lead to spiritual harm, taking the place of their relationship with God at a point in their lives where their relationship with Him should be their primary focus. Students of this school will not be permitted to date each other or anyone not a student of this school. If a student is found to be dating, the administrator will schedule a meeting with the parents/guardians and request their support in ending the child's dating relationship. If a student is found to be dating, the administrator will schedule a meeting with the parents/guardians and request their support in ending the child's dating relationship. The student will receive demerits. The amount will be at the administrator's discretion. If the parents or student refuse to stop the dating, then the student will be required to transfer to another school. This occurred to me. I think it's so interesting how the principal and because he's obviously the one who wrote this, was all like, you need to side with me whenever I take a stand against your child. But if a parent makes a decision, it's not the teacher and the principal standing with the parent. No, the parent is almost like, I feel like, secondary to the principal/pastor of the school. If the pastor wants something to be that way, the parent needs to submit to the pastor and make sure it goes that way. And I just think that's kind of messed up. Like, that's a little backwards, I feel like. Anyway, so yeah, I attended school under those rules for a year. I was actually a little goody two-shoes and followed the rules pretty well, because it's just how I was. Though I remember a lot of my friends sneaking around and doing things that they weren't supposed to do. Though I was not a tattletale for the most part, I feel like. again, there were also people who, if they were good with the pastor, they were allowed to break the rules. Because I remember my best friend, she wanted to go to a Christian school dance, and you had to have signed permission from your pastor to go. And she got it from him, even though the rule book clearly says no dancing. And I had two friends who, like I said before, weren't dating technically, but they were dating. Like, they were doing everything you would be doing if you were dating. They just weren't calling it that. And because the pastor approved of the relationship, he turned a blind eye to it. But when another girl started doing something similar with someone who was not from the Baptist church, he got really upset about it. His rules were just very inconsistent. And again, he allowed for a lot of that in the way he worded this rule book. Anyway, everybody, thanks for watching me trauma dump on you about what my year in a Christian school was like. I actually am not against Christian schools and probably would send my child to a Christian school over a public school, but it would not be something like this. I would want to send them to like one of those really fancy, expensive private Christian schools that are accredited and that have really high standards. Make sure that before you send your child to a Christian school, you know it's a good one and not a weird one like this. Thanks again for watching.